Congress gives Woodrow Wilson pretty broad powers during World War I. And one of the things that Woodrow Wilson goes for, Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States during World War I. And one of the things that Woodrow Wilson is influential in creating is called the WIB, or the War Industries Board. This is the main regulatory body of Woodrow Wilson trying to kind of nationalize certain war-related industries. So what this board does is it encouraged companies to use mass production techniques to increase efficiency and eliminate waste. All right, so some of the things that they would do is like, if you own a typewriter company, instead of making, like, you know how like printers have ink, typewriters have ribbon, and there's different colors of ribbon that you can type with. And so during World War I, they said instead of making 150 colors of ink, make 5 colors and specialize in that and mass produce those 5. And that was the world, and that increased efficiency. They could produce them a lot faster. And then that's just one example. It's, not a great example, but it's one example. So the WIB set production quotas for companies. Like you have to make this much, or once you've made this much, you have to stop. And they also allocated raw materials, sent certain materials certain places. One such person who took this advice and ran with it was a good man by the name of Henry Ford. You ever heard of him? And in 1913, Henry Ford speeded up factory production with a constantly moving assembly line. Wartime production used his technique, and it was applied to almost every industry in the United States, the assembly line technique. Okay. Wages, meaning how much workers got paid in industrial factories, rose in most industries during the war years. Especially wages for blue-collar workers in the metal trades or shipbuilding or meat packing. Their wages went up like 20%. But the increase in wages was also met with inflation of prices. So your raise is undercut by an increase in prices. It's like, hey, yeah, you make $200 a week, and that, you go from making $200 a week to $250 a week, but the cost of what it costs you when you go to the store increases $70 because prices go up. Is that really a raise? Not really. Okay, so even though wages went up, but so did housing and food costs. Those went up as well. Now, in contrast to the working man, stockholders, people that own stock in large corporations, saw enormous profits. One industrial manufacturer who has a very large chemical base here in West Virginia, DuPont, you ever heard of it? You pass it on the way to Charleston. They saw its stock multiply in value 1,600%. Wouldn't you like to put a buck in DuPont? 1,600% during the war from 1914 to 1918. One of the ways they were able to increase their profits to that much was an uneven pay between management and labor. Management makes a lot more than labor. Increasing work hours, using children, child labor, don't have to pay them as much, and dangerously sped up conditions. So, wages are going down, your working conditions are not improving, you have to bring your children to work. What do you think is ultimately going to happen when labor is taken advantage of like this? Strikes. And during the World War I, about 6,000 strikes happened. So you're Woodrow Wilson, you're president of the United States, and you have 6,000 strikes happen during the war. What happens when a strike happens? Not working. And so whatever is being produced is no longer being produced. What if you're working at a chemical factory that produces stuff to make rubber for tires for trucks that are used in World War I? No more tires? No more trucks? Could that help? Is that helping us win the war? It's hurting the war effort. So, to deal with disputes between management and labor, President Wilson, he established a National War Labor Board, NWLB, National War Labor Board. All right, and basically the government stepped in and said, all right, look, we know you're upset, you're striking. If you continue this strike, we're going to send you to war. Like, you're going to be drafted. That's what the laborers were told. The ownership was told, look, 8-hour workday, safety inspections, no child labor. Now get back to work. So, you're going to go to work, and then also to keep, to help the people that are going to work, 8-hour workday, safety inspections, no child labor. So nobody really liked the National War Labor Board because nobody really got what they want. All right. Another thing that the government did during World War I, where they got involved, was the Food Administration. It's called the Food Administration. It was set up under Woodrow Wilson's presidency, but he chose a man by the name of Herbert Hoover to run it. You ever heard of Herbert Hoover? He becomes president soon. Now, at this time, food was not as bountiful as it is today. There was no Walmart where you got 400,000 types of grocery, cereal on the shelf. It was not like that, okay? So some people in the government thought that the United States should ration food. Like, here's a ticket, and you show up at the store, and they give you your food for the week, right? Food rationing. Instead of that, Herbert Hoover calls what he called the gospel of the clean plate. The gospel of the clean plate. And he just kind of declared certain days of the week people would sacrifice eating certain things. Like, one day would be a meatless day. No meat on certain days of the week. Other days would be sweetless days. So you'd have meatless days and sweetless days. On meatless days, there's no meat. On sweetless days, there's no sugar. You don't eat sugar. And then other days would be certain kinds of meat, like porkless. No pork on certain days. Restaurants used to keep sugar on the table. They would remove the sugar bowls from the table. Stop restaurants, instead of serving bread with your meal, stop serving bread with the meal. Stuff like that. Small sacrifices. Okay? Now, in doing this creates an enormous black market because when you typically in America, when you tell Americans they can't do something, they're going to do it. Look at prohibition. Like, hey, you have to wear a mask. You guys been to the store lately? People wearing them? No. So, Americans historically don't like to be told what to do. But that doesn't mean that some Americans are still not patriotic and good and great Americans. You know, some people went so far as to do things like plant these things called victory gardens. Like they would just go to, out in their yard or to an abandoned lot in their neighborhood and till up the ground and plant vegetables. School children would spend their after-school hours growing tomatoes and cucumbers in public parks. And as a result of these and similar efforts, American shipments of food to the Allied forces in Europe tripled. We were able to sustain our soldiers and the soldiers of our friends, the Allied forces, threefold. Hoover also put a high government price on wheat and other staples, meaning he increases the price of wheat. What do you think happens as a result of Herbert Hoover setting a price cap, a limit on wheat, making it high, meaning the price of wheat is high? If I'm a farmer, what am I going to grow? Wheat. Why? Because it's expensive and I can get a lot of money for growing wheat. So what happens to the production of wheat? It goes way up. We almost overproduce. An additional 40 million acres of American soil turned into wheat production, which in the short term was excellent for those farmers. They made a great turnaround in the short term. In the long term, though, what happens when you have a surplus of a certain good or item? The price of it drops because you overstimulated the demand. And that is one of the things that leads to the Great Depression. Okay? All right, so is war cheap or is war expensive? Very expensive. And at this time, there was no income tax. Can you imagine not having to pay income tax? You guys got jobs? Yeah, doesn't it suck? You get your payday, and it's like, hey, I made $10 an hour, and I worked 40 hours this week. So how much should you get paid if you worked 5 days? You make $10 an hour, and you worked 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. You should make $400, right? So he's like, oh man, I got a nice $400 payday coming to me. And you get your paycheck, and it says $290. What the heck? I thought I was supposed to make $400. You don't even pay those taxes. They take them from you. All right? That didn't exist. There was no income tax here. So the government was not raking in the amount of money that they do today. So in order to pay for the war, they really had to sell it to the people. They needed to get the citizens of the United States to give their money to support the war effort. And so you see a mass propaganda campaign to make the war more popular. Now, the United States government spent about $35.5 billion on the war. That's a lot of money. That's 1918 money. Now, the government does raise about 1/3 of that through its typical taxes, through its tariffs, and eventually a progressive income tax comes about out of this. They also increase taxes on the excise taxes. What do you think they increased the taxes on? Remember, you know of any excise taxes from the past? George Washington put one on. Whiskey, liquor, tobacco, luxury type stuff. All right. The rest of the money, the other $20 billion they needed, they fundraised through selling Liberty bonds or Liberty loans or Victory bonds, Victory loans. They had different names. And the government sold tens of thousands of these things through volunteers. Volunteers like movie stars, which was a new profession during World War I. Movie stars. Movie stars would go and speak at rallies and factories and schools and street corners and make you feel bad about yourself and say that you only a friend of Germany wouldn't buy a Liberty bond. Make you feel like you were unpatriotic by not helping. So in order to get this to work, they had to popularize the war. They had to make it popular. So the government literally set up its first ever propaganda agency. An agency it created to influence people's thoughts and opinions. That's what you guys know what propaganda is, right? It's a biased communication designed to influence people's thoughts and actions. That's what propaganda is. Okay? The organization the government created is called the CPI, the Committee on Public Information. Doesn't that sound harmless? And to some extent, I guess it could be. The Committee on Public Information. The head of the Committee on Public Information is a man by the name of George Creel. He was a former yellow journalist. Remember yellow journalism? Remember the Spanish-American War? George Creel. He's one of the guys responsible for it. Okay? Now, Creel is now working for the government, and he's told he needs to make the war popular. So he persuades a lot of the nation's artists and advertising agents to create thousands of paintings, posters, cartoons, sculptures, songs, all these things that promote and glorify the war. And he recruited some 75,000 men to serve as what is called 4-minute men. They're called 4-minute men who spoke about everything related to the war. They were capable of succinctly and distinctly and precisely describing why America needs to support it and why people should donate their money to support it in 4 minutes. And they would do everything to talk about, even the unpopular things they made popular. They talked about the draft. They talked about how you had to ration your food. They talked about how you had to buy these bonds. They talked about how you had to go plant victory gardens. They even talked about why we're fighting the war and what it means to be an American. And they directly talked about it. So while art and music were the most popular, there was still a significant portion of the American population that was illiterate, could not read, and so the picture tells 1,000 words. The Creel did not neglect the written word either, printing up about 25 million copies of a pamphlet called How the War Came to America. How it wasn't us we're not warmongers, it came to us. And in it includes Woodrow Wilson's message about the war. It was printed in multiple languages, not just English. And he distributed several million pamphlets of it. How do you do that? How are you going to get several million people? They didn't do it through the mail. They put it in people's hands. What organization do you think he used in order to distribute these pamphlets about why the war effort was important? He used the Boy Scouts of America. You get some bright-eyed little young Boy Scout up to you wearing a uniform Help our boys overseas. Here's a pamphlet. It's brilliant. And the Boy Scouts were enthusiastic about it. So Creel's propaganda campaign, successful or unsuccessful? Highly successful. Uncle Sam, you guys seen this? I Want You, this Uncle Sam? That was created out of this campaign, this poster. This is World War I propaganda, this Uncle Sam poster. I Want You for the U.S. Army. What's its purpose? To increase people to volunteer for military service. That's what it's for, okay? All right, what about these? Clear the way. Obviously, what's this for? Can you guys see it? You got a lady here, pretty scantily dressed with the American flag draped around her. What's going on down here? These are men aboard a naval vessel, and they're firing a large artillery gun. And what does this woman want you to do to help these guys out? Can you guys not read that? It literally says what to do. Buy bonds, okay? Hey, we are going to use some patriotic symbolism of America, the Statue of Liberty. You buy a Liberty bond lest I perish. You want liberty to die in the United States? So they're using a little bit of fear. Here, it is meatless days, so buy some fish. Avoid the meat, buy the fish. I know you guys are like, isn't fish meat? Not really, okay? It's not considered meat. So while George Creel's propaganda campaign is highly effective, there are some negative consequences of it, okay? Because all of these things promote extreme patriotism, and extreme nationalism, extreme pride in one's own nation. But in doing so, it radicalizes the more extreme elements of American society. As you know, we have a history of nativism. What is nativism? People that support and only support white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant men. That's the good old boys club, right? Well, you're going to see an inflammation of hatred toward who? Okay, ethnic groups and people who are opponents of the war. So anyone that speaks out about this, okay? And then obviously you're going to see an increase in hatred of who's getting the blame for the war? The Germans, okay? So you're going to see a lot of attacks on civil liberties. During World War I, there was also, there was the Spanish flu, by the way. Remember that? I'm sure you've heard about that lately. But there was also an outbreak of German measles. But we're not going. They refused to call them German measles. They called them Liberty measles. What kind of dog is this? You guys don't know what kind of dog this is? What kind of dog is that? I'm not a dog person, and I know what kind of dog this is. It's a dachshund. Dachshund. You ever heard of that? What do we call dachshunds? Wiener dogs. You know when we started calling them wiener dogs? During World War I, because dachshund is a German word. And German shepherds. Stopped calling them German shepherds, called them police dogs. What's this? It's a hot dog. You know when we started calling them hot dogs? World War I. Why? Because they were called Frankfurters, named after Frankfurt, Germany. Anti-German sentiment, okay? Look at this. This is like a 3-year-old. The hell with the Kaiser. 3-year-old kids. Yeah. So, you know, hamburgers. We love hamburgers, right? We stopped calling them hamburgers. You know what we called them? Liberty sandwiches. Go get me a McDonald's Liberty sandwich. There was no McDonald's back then. Sauerkraut became Liberty cabbage, or these are Liberty pups or wiener dogs. Okay, so you see a great amount of anti-German sentiment created here. All right, and so there is a significant portion of the American population that does not want to see the United States get involved in this war. Don't want us to go. Don't want to go for the draft, and they speak out against it openly, using their First Amendment right to say we don't want to go, and neither should anybody else. Well, in 1917, Congress passes what's known as the Espionage Act. And then in 1918, they passed the Sedition Act. Together, the Espionage and Sedition Acts, the Espionage and Sedition Acts, what they could do is if you speak up against the war, or you encourage somebody to not show up for the draft, you could be fined up to $10,000 and have 20 years of jail time simply for interfering with the war effort. Or if you say anything that's disloyal, profane, or abusive about the government. So if you say, that stupid SOB, Woodrow Wilson, how dare he get us involved in this war? You could receive 20 years of jail time and pay $10,000 for that. Is that something profane about the government and the war effort? Yeah, it is. Can you imagine that? What is this a massive violation of? Your freedom of speech, your right to disagree, your right to debate and dissent over opinions. This is very similar to the Alien and Sedition Acts of John Adams' administration. Do you remember them? People that promoted the French sentiment. But these laws are clearly a violation of the First Amendment. And about 2,000 people were prosecuted under these laws. Newspapers and magazines that opposed the war were critical of it, lost their mailing privileges, and reporters were locked up. So what group of people makes up the largest portion of people who are against the war? The Espionage and Sedition Acts target socialists, and labor leaders. Some influential labor leaders of the time was a man by the name of Eugene V. Debs. This is not a Supreme Court case. This is a man. His middle name starts with a V. Eugene V. Debs. He was given a 10-year prison sentence merely for speaking out against the war and the draft. Look at this lady. Looks like the Monopoly guy, right? With the monocle. Get me a monocle. She is an anarchist. What does that mean? No government. She received 2 years in prison and a $10,000 fine for organizing the No Conscription League. Meaning, if you get drafted, you don't go. When she got out of jail, authorities deported her to Russia, which was kind of welcoming to socialists at this time, as they had just had a socialist revolution. This man, Big Bill Haywood, he and other industrial workers of the world, IWW members, it's a big labor union, they were accused of sabotaging the war effort because they urged workers to strike. He's just a labor leader who urged workers to strike to get better conditions and better pay. Well, you are harming the war effort, Big Bill. And so you're going to prison for encouraging people to have a better life. Big Bill was sentenced to like 20 years in prison for that. Well, he skipped out of town. He left and went to Russia as well. But he was the leader of the IWW, the internet, the industrial workers of the world, a big labor union, and the labor union just falls apart when he leaves. So, as I mentioned before at the beginning of class, your rights change based on whether we're at war. These people are simply speaking out against the war, saying it's not, we don't want to go fight and die, for a country that we can barely survive in. So, the espionage and sedition acts definitely had a big impact on your freedoms of speech. Okay? Now, wars often also unleash powerful social forces, and the World War I was no exception, as we saw very important changes that transformed the lives of African Americans and women. All right? So one person who's very important is a man by the name of W.E.B. Du Bois. Black public opinion about the war was divided. On one side, you had people like Du Bois, who believed that blacks should support the war. And Du Bois believed that African Americans' support for the war would help bring about social justice, being able to be seen in equal eyes with the white man. Whereas others believe that African Americans are going to be victims of racism again and should not support a racist government who allows for things like Jim Crow laws and should not support the war. And despite any kind of racial inequality, you should not back it. What do you think most African Americans did? Were they like Du Bois, or were they like, I think the guy's name was Trotter, who said do not support it? Most African Americans backed the war. They supported the war effort. A lot of this is because it provided them with new opportunities. 3 million men had just been sent overseas to go fight. Well, that means they left 3 million jobs available. And so you begin to see a great migration. The greatest effect on African Americans in the First World War was the Great Migration. This is a large-scale movement of hundreds of thousands of Southern blacks into the cities of the North and the West. You guys watch that brand new TV show on Amazon, Them? Anybody seen it yet? It's about a black family who moves from North Carolina to Compton, California, which at that time was an entirely white community. All right? And they're doing this in the time period after the wars, where people are trying to find they're trying to escape Jim Crow laws of the South and have opportunity at new industrial jobs in these growing cities. So you see black people flooding out of the South to fulfill these needed job positions in urban areas. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of Southern blacks moving to the cities of the North. Okay? Escaping Jim Crow laws, and several factors contributed to this tremendous increase in black migration. They want to escape discrimination in the South, the Jim Crow laws. There was a boll weevil infestation which harmed crops, and so a lot of the South was still based on farming. There were lots of job opportunities, like Henry Ford's automobile assembly lines. He opened them up to black workers. So lots of reasons why. Some push and pull factors for the Great Migration, which is what this is referred to as in history, and it lasts for like 50 years, even after World War II. The Great Migration happens. Okay. All right. Tomorrow we'll pick up with women and how women are affected by World War I.